Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. It is such a pleasure to have everybody joining us here today for this special session, looking at such an interesting area, looking at intergenerational and collective trauma. And so before I introduce our wonderful speaker for today, I just have a brief introduction about Mind Medicine Australia and about the work that we do. I'm sure there are many on this call who will have heard this before, but I'm sure there are also plenty of new people here. And so I will give this introduction just as a brief beginning. But before I even get into that, I might just ask everybody who's comfortable to just close down their eyes or just even soften your gaze for a moment. And just together, I might ask everyone to take a deep breath in and just holding that breath for a moment and then letting it out. Taking a breath together as a group before we start this session. And as we do this, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians, caretakers of the land and the many locations that we're meeting from today, and acknowledge the connection they have to land, to waters and community, and to pay our respects to their elders, past and present. As I do this, I'd also like to acknowledge the wisdom, deep wisdom carried in cultures from around the world, First Nations cultures and other cultures and wisdom traditions that teach us how to live in harmony with the land, with each other, and with all sentient beings. Giving special thanks to the medicine keepers, the medicine men and women in many First Nations cultures who have safeguarded traditions around plant medicines and other ancient healing modalities, protected and carried these forward through millennia. And then finally, I would like to acknowledge each and every person on this call, both the beauty and the light that everybody brings, but then to also acknowledge that we ourselves are all modern custodians, modern caretakers of the land. And in that, we have a responsibility to look after each other and look after the land on which we meet and on which we walk. And just keeping that in mind so that we can perhaps learn and deepen our own wisdom for each other in order to create a world that has harmony, which is something that we really all need together. And so again, just taking perhaps one last deep breath and letting that go as we now start to move into this afternoon session. Bear with me for just one moment as I bring up these slides. So our session today, the topic is understanding and healing from ancestral trauma in times of turbulence and transformation. So incredibly topical, and a huge thank you to Rabbi Tirzah Firestone for joining us. I can't wait to get into the session. To begin with, a very brief disclaimer. Mind Medicine Australia's focus is on the development and use of evidence-based psychedelic-assisted therapies within regulated healthcare systems. We don't encourage the use of psychedelic medicines outside of this context, and we definitely don't support of these medicines in any way that is unlawful. Our presentations are intended for educational purposes only, and they don't constitute medical advice. Individuals should discuss their individual healthcare needs with their healthcare provider. And just as a note, this session will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. So just to create an initial and brief piece of framing, the health epidemic in Australia and around the world, the mental health epidemic, I should say, is serious. There's 1 in 4 Australians with a mental illness, 1 in 6 on antidepressants. And this includes significant numbers of people and even higher in older populations. There's huge costs to this, and obviously there's a cost to society, but really far more importantly is the cost to human life and potential, and just the incredible suffering that comes around with suffering from mental illness and being held with them. And since we started Mind Medicine Australia, what we've seen is just slowness and resistance sometimes to change, as there are some embedded views, and often in large systems there is often resistance to change. And this is one of the challenges that we see in the mental health care sector. And so, as you'll see at the bottom here of this slide, despite the best efforts of clinicians, this mental health epidemic isn't getting better. And so the elephant in the room, as we like to say, is a lack of innovation in treatments for mental illness. And when I say that, what do I mean? I mean, realistically, we've seen very little to no improvement in treatment outcomes over 50 years. For depression, remission rates are very low, sometimes as low as 15% from antidepressants. Larger numbers show response, but experience continuing symptoms, and side effects are common, as many will know, whether that's through personal experience or experience of loved ones. Things such as insomnia, psychosis, blurred vision, dry mouth, etc., etc. PTSD also is another example of a mental illness with a really low response rate and even lower remission rates. So a more of the same approach isn't solving the problem. So this is the reason that My Medicine Australia was founded 5 years ago now. We are a mental health charity, or not-for-profit. We're focused on alleviating suffering through new treatment innovation, really looking with a whole system approach. Our primary focus is on making psychedelic-assisted therapies part of the health system in a controlled way. The two primary medicines that we've looked at, as it says here, are psilocybin and MDMA, and then there is a secondary interest in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, but psilocybin and MDMA at this stage, when being used within a psychotherapeutic protocol, are the ones that have the greatest evidence base and the ones that we've put the most effort into and energy into supporting. And our indications of success, you'll see here, there are three really key ones. The first is allowing these to become and supporting these to become an integral part of our mental health system. The second is so that they can achieve high remission rates, leading to a substantial improvement in those mental health statistics that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, and extremely importantly, that they're accessible and affordable to all Australians who could benefit from them. So that these aren't just treatments that become available for those in capital cities and for those that are wealthy. So how is it that we aim to achieve that? We have four key strategic pillars that we work towards. You'll see here, you'll see them outlined here. The first is awareness and knowledge building that sessions like today are a part of. The second is our professional development program, which supports training and education for healthcare professionals. The third is supporting research so we can continue to develop the knowledge base around these therapies. And then finally, supporting accessibility, and that includes affordability. So just to give a brief outline of some of the key achievements that we have achieved over the last 5 years across these four strategic pillars. With patient access, perhaps most centrally, we applied for and were successful in achieving the rescheduling of MDMA and psilocybin in Australia, which made Australia the first country in the world to reschedule these medicines. We've secured access pathways for MDMA and psilocybin, and this is allowing for GMP quality, pharmaceutical quality medicine to be available in Australia in partnership with Optimize Health in Canada. And it's important to mention the reason for this was to make sure that the pricing of medicine was low to keep treatment costs down, and is something with a key focus on supporting affordability, and then launching our patient support fund, and collaborating with health insurers to try to create access to more funding to help make these treatments affordable. To the second of these pillars, awareness and knowledge building. Back in, it was 2021, we hosted the International Summit on Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies, and then we regularly screen events such as this, our global webinar series, which you're on a part of today, as well as other media presentations, our podcast as well, and blog, and then we have a network of community chapters, community program. Our professional development program, we're on track to train over 500 healthcare practitioners. Our certificate, that's through our certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies, which is the central piece in that program. And that's a 4-month course, which I'll speak to a little bit more in a moment, that takes healthcare providers to a point of being ready to start working in the psychedelic space. And then the fundamentals of psychedelic-assisted therapy for mental health is a short online course that's open to anybody. And we'll be launching this and then running a live version of this course in October in collaboration with Drug Science from the UK. So this is an exciting opportunity for anyone who's interested in starting to go a little bit deeper in their understanding of this field. And then supporting research. So it was our advocacy efforts that secured $15 million of government funding towards psychedelic trials in Australia. And then we're also the largest funder of research outside of government and pharmaceutical sectors, supporting a number of trials, including a registry that is run by the Australian National University, collecting outcome data from the authorised prescriber scheme to start collecting real-world evidence as these treatments become available in Australia, so we can understand how they work in clinical practice, not just in clinical trials, in order to inform further regulatory change. And so just as one last slide to these achievements, this is a brief slide showing some of the headlines when last year the rescheduling of MDMA and psilocybin was successful. Much to the surprise of many, it made Australia the first country to do so, really putting Australia in a leading position in the world in this field. But it is a key thing for us to remember, as it says at the bottom here, there is an obligation on Australia to get this right. And so just as a couple of last notes about some of our sort of key programs and how you can be involved with Mind Medicine Australia, as I mentioned, our certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies is a 4-month training program. It's open to healthcare practitioners of a broad variety, and it focuses on the medicinal use of MDMA and psilocybin as well as ketamine-assisted therapies. You'll see this quote here from Professor David Nutt, where he stated that he feels it's the leading course of its kind in the world. It has an incredible faculty. I pinch myself sometimes with the caliber of people I have the opportunity to work with, including today's speaker, Rabbi Tirzah Firestone, who we're so grateful for her involvement. And so you really do have an opportunity for those who take this training to learn from the very best in this field internationally. The next course is about to begin, actually the week after next. If you would like to make a last-minute application, there is a chance we may be able to squeeze a couple of last applications in. So reach out to that email address, fill out the application form. Then next year we'll be running again in February. So there's opportunities to jump in for next year as well. So please do go to cpat.mindmedicineaustralia.org to learn more and apply for anyone who is interested in getting trained. And then just finally, for everybody else, if you're interested in volunteering, sharing some of our content, having conversations with those in your communities in order to keep raising awareness, these are all ways that you can help out. We appreciate any donations and engaging with us on social media as well. As a quick note, we do have a job opportunity to join our team for those based in Melbourne. This is for someone in an administrative position supporting both sides of the organization, so both our general advocacy work, but then with a specific focus on supporting the delivery of the training program. So anyone who is interested in that, please go to mindmedicineaustralia.org.au/work with us for more information, and you can put in an application there. And then if anybody would like to support us with a donation, you can make 2 forms of donations. So the first is specifically into our patient support fund. 100% of donations into this go to supporting those who are going to receive psychedelic assisted treatment or who wouldn't receive psychedelic assisted treatment because they couldn't afford it, but to subsidizing the treatment to make that more affordable. And then our general support fund. And with this, you will support more broadly the activities of the charity. So that includes financial assistance towards the practitioner training, supporting the awareness and advocacy activities that we do. Obviously, we rely on donations to support a lot of the activities because advocacy doesn't generate revenue. So we really do appreciate and give thanks to anybody who's able to support our work in that way. And then one final slide, upcoming events. We have really more great speakers in this program between now and the rest of the year. So we have Rick Doblin coming up in September, Jim Fadiman, Robin Carhart-Harris, and then Alan Young from King's College in London. So please do register and join us again for these sessions over the coming months. And so that is the end of my slides. Thank you to everybody for sitting with me, as I know that I am not the person everybody is here to see. And so I would like to now pass over to our speaker, Rabbi Tirzah Firestone, with a huge thank you for joining us. Tirzah is an author. She's a Jungian psychotherapist. She's a leader in the international Jewish renewal movement, and she's a renowned Jewish scholar and teacher. She's widely known for her groundbreaking work on Kabbalah, depth psychology, and the reintegration of the feminine wisdom tradition within Judaism. Rabbi Tirzah lectures and teaches internationally about spiritual and ancient wisdom practices that are honed to assist us at this critical time in world history. Her latest work, Wounds into Wisdom, Healing Intergenerational Jewish Trauma, is the recipient of the 2020 Nautilus Book Award Gold in Psychology and the Jewish Women's Caucus of the Association for Women in Psychology 2020 Book Award. Tirzah, it is such a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I'm excited to be back with MMA. Excited to welcome all of you to this gathering from all hemispheres and quarters around the planet. I know it's not only down under that we are welcoming you. I am personally beaming to you from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, the original lands of the Southern Arapaho and the Cheyenne people. And for us, it's just dusk. For some of you coming in from the East Coast of the United States, it's already starlit, new moon night. And then, of course, for our friends in Australia and New Zealand, it's already high noon. Wherever you're joining from, I'm so happy that you've come. I'm guessing that, like my own, your life has changed exponentially in the last 5 years, because now we are meeting one another like this and seeing each other on flat screens, but that doesn't underestimate the power of our meetings. Somehow we magically get constellated, and it facilitates the deep work that we can do online, the deep work of learning and growing and healing that's being called forth from us across nationalities, across ethnicities. And this is the work of repairing our bloodlines and repairing our families, repairing our ethnicities. I don't have to tell you, these are momentous times. They're times of uncertainty that leave so many of us vibrating, reverberating with our mouths open at the intensity and the shocking nature of global events, and calling on us to do more, calling us to understand more and to do more and to open our lens, our windows of perception, cleanse the windows of our perception so we can understand how did we get here. You may sense that your own personal work of healing, your life, your family's life, belongs to a larger context. Maybe you're working on issues of anxiety or loneliness or fear or old oppressive patterns that you've been carrying with you for forever, of scarcity or exclusion or obsessions or inability to connect and feel a part of life or part of others. In this webinar tonight, or I should say today, tomorrow, whenever this is, whenever you are hearing these words, this is what we're about. We're about to explore how our perspective and our wisdom becomes increased, becomes augmented just by widening the lens to include the larger context of our bloodlines, of our ancestors, of the historical traumas that predated us. Now, these may be hushed, they may be family secrets, they may be unnamables, they may be deferred or unfelt grief, they may be the aborted dreams, unfinished lives that came before us. And as we shall see together in this webinar, we all have emotional inheritances, I should say, inheritance, meaning legacies that are as important. These emotional legacies are as important as our genetic legacies, are what we inherit, the brown eyes, the straight hair, the curly hair, the long fingers, the whatever it is that we inherited from our ancestors. We also have emotional inheritances. And in this broader context, we begin to discover that many of the issues that we are personally working with did not begin with us. There's a context. They have roots. My issues of depression, or my issues of addiction or exclusion, or the things that compel me, or the things, my nervous system issues, They have roots in the lives of those who came before me, our ancestors. So speaking of ancestors, I want to continue. Thank you so much. That was very moving, Scott, to invoke those upon who blazed the trail on the lands on which we live. Let's actually now call in the teachers and the ancestors, known to us and in some cases unknown, who helped us be who we are today. We'll take a breath and just reflect. Who are the teachers? It may be your third grade teacher. It may be your rabbi or priest. It may be a historical figure. For me, it's Carl Jung and Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory, Dr. Maury Wortman, Rabbanit Leah Sharabi. Who is it for you? Upon whose shoulders do you stand? And take a moment to do that. There's a teaching that calling somebody who is deceased, quote unquote, dead, by name, by the name that they walked the earth with, reconstellates them. It's like a spiritual calling card, and they reconstellate from the ends of the universe to come to our assistance. But the name is very, very important. So please do whisper the name of your beloved teacher or teachers or ancestors right now. Now, our topic is enormous, and everything that I would love to share with you is not possible in our allotted time. We have just a bit of time, but I have culled, I think, some of the best teaching tools, i.e. stories, and a few basic principles to put forth the ideas of this burgeoning field that we call ancestral healing. It's also called intergenerational trauma healing. These terms are almost interchangeable. So let me begin with a story. This is a story that I do tell in Wounds into Wisdom. It's about a young woman in her 20s by the name of Monica, who's had an irrational fear of abandonment and anxiety about people not being able to show up for her. And it drove her and everyone around her to distraction. And she almost broke off an engagement, her engagement to a man she loved. She subsequently did marry, because he came home late by an hour from a ski trip and wasn't able to call and let her know. And she paced furiously around, and she planned her breakup, and she planned his funeral, and she was pulling her hair out. And she came to me for counseling, and she asked, why do I always expect the worst? What is it? What is this deep dread in my body? This feeling of disconnection from the people that I love. I'm always scared, she said. And she said, when people show up for me, when they say they will show up for me and they don't, I cannot take it. And she said that a couple of times. And so she was a graduate student at a nearby college, and in her graduate work, she was doing genealogical work for her graduate thesis, and she came upon an old family video. And it was an interview with her maternal grandmother. Just months before she died, this maternal grandmother. And Monica knew that her grandmother, she had heard the stories of her grandmother, that she had been hiding in World War II. She had been living with the partisans, hiding in the forest for 26 months with her sister and her mother. Eventually, the Nazis found them, and very sadly shot her mother and her sister in front of her before her eyes. And she, the grandmother, took a bullet in her own face, and it lodged in her jaw. She was left for dead, but she didn't die. And here, Monica is watching this video and listening to the story that the maternal grandmother is saying. And she says, she hears these words, I'm always scared. I have dread in my body. When people say they will show up and they don't, I can't take it. It was like this crazy, surreal experience. The very words that Monica had said herself, had exclaimed herself, verbatim. Here they were. Her grandmother was saying those words. And oh my God, Monica said, shaking her head, my anxiety is so much bigger than me. So she got it. Boom, a light bulb went off and she was able to understand, wow, that is not mine alone. And that something had passed to her transgenerationally that she was repeating. She was repeating a pattern and wrapping her own life experience around something that was embedded inside of her nervous system, it felt like. So I want to invite you, because we're talking about trauma, to please have a glass of water handy. I always ask this of my students and audience. L'chaim, cheers. Because it helps to calm the nervous system when we listen to stories such as these. And these stories evoke our own stories. There's no one here who doesn't have a story of a traumatic history in their ancestry. No one here. I also invite you to have a journal or a device or a scratch pad to scribble any thoughts or insights or questions that you might have, because later we'll have a chance to have a little discussion. And now, perhaps you have come to this webinar with your own personal curiosity, your own personal question, something that's niggling you, something that's bothering you, particularly that has something to say to you. And I'd love to have you jot that down right now. And it may be as broad as, where the heck am I in my life? What the hell is going on in American politics? Can you help me out? It could be anything at all. A question, a curiosity, something that you have brought with you to this gathering. Now, when my book, Wounds into Wisdom, came out several years ago, I had absolutely no idea that the ideas that I was writing about would instantly connect with people all over the world. I was really shocked. And it was also COVID. And so I was teaching online, and people from Hong Kong and Rwanda and Ireland and Romania and all over, Indigenous Canada and Indigenous Australia. It was as if there was an awakening in the shared consciousness of humanity, what Carl Jung calls the collective unconscious. Something was wakening up and burgeoning. So let's go with this question. And Ilan, if you would go to our slides, just a few slides tonight, or today, tomorrow. There we go. We can go to the next one. And yeah, there we go. You can go to the next one. That's great. Why? Nope. Back one. Why is ancestral healing critical to the world now? Why is it critical to the world now? I would suggest it is why people around the world are working on their genealogies, are studying their ancestry, why all these online Ancestry.com and Genie.com and hordes of others are becoming so popular. People making pilgrimages to their ancestral homelands, putting pictures of their ancestors on their altars, or on, taking them out. There is a new understanding coming to light that past generations are with us. They are here with us. They are here inside of us. And next slide. There is a new understanding that the painful histories that our ancestors endured, as well as all of their resources and wisdom, their love, their resilience, those too are encoded inside of us, their descendants. They create the patterns of who we are and who we are becoming. Okay, back to me. Thanks. And there's a scientific reason as well. And that is because 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have the data, the plain data that is now in circulation popularly. By 2020, there was a good 15, 20 years of research data that was coming out of the laboratories in a burgeoning field called epigenetics. You can bring the spotlight back to me, Elon, so people aren't looking at the same old slide. There we go. Okay, thank you. So this field of epigenetics, let's discuss it for just a moment. You don't have to be a scientist or even scientifically oriented to appreciate this field. It tracks the field, what it does, this new branch of neuroscience tracks the influence of stresses that are inherited, environmental stresses, such as the stresses of war, of poverty, of discrimination, of racial violence, of displacement, all of these very powerful forces that I dare say affected all of our ancestors. You might be the aristocracy in New Zealand, but I promise you somebody in your background was not always so well off or so secure or so peaceful. Epigenetics demonstrates how the histories, the painful histories, as well as the well histories that our ancestors lived through, become encoded in us. The actual science is fascinating, far beyond the scope of the time that we have together. But let's say this, let's go back to the slides now and look at what this word epigenetics means. So again, the science of epigenetics is the study of heritable or inherited environmental stresses. And like I said, it's not about the blue eyes or the long fingers. It's about environmental stresses, that which comes to us through our environment and does not change our genetics, but changes how our genetics express themselves. Let's look at the word itself. Epi means above or on top of the genes. And the genes are, of course, the carriers of hereditary information. Next slide. So it's through epigenetic mechanisms, such as methylation, but others as well, that genes become activated or deactivated, emphasized, or hushed. And this is fascinating stuff because I may have very healthy genes, and yet because my grandfather was in war, was in the World War I trenches, and came home deeply traumatized, that deactivates the gene response, the expression of genes that was translated to his son, my father. And that means that his resilience levels may have been deactivated, and he's much more prone to PTSD because of what his father went through. And his daughter, me, maybe also have inherited that suppressed gene expression. So my resilience level, my propensity for PTSD, my stress levels when I move houses or someone in my family has to go to the hospital, may be very, very low because of what's in my ancestral background. Next slide. The key here is that unlike genes can't be changed, but epigenetics can be changed. They can be reversible. And as we go through our talk tonight or today or tomorrow, I want you to be thinking about what the key might be. Take a guess. How do you go about changing yourself from the inside out? You may have heard that brains are neuroplastic, that we have a neuroplasticity in our brains. We can change our brains. We can change our attitudes. We can actually change it. We can also change our epigenetics, what we inherited from our ancestors that depletes or represses or suppresses is a better word, our resilience or our IQ or our ability to bounce back due to our ancestral load. So if you have a guess about that, we'll circle back around and talk about what that is, but I'd love to hear your guesses. So for now, let's get on the same page by defining our terms and look at what do we mean by trauma. Next slide. Trauma literally means wound. It's an ancient word. It's the residue of any deeply distressing life experience that overwhelms our coping mechanisms. It overwhelms our coping capacities. We'll see what that does to our nervous system in just a moment. Resmaa Menakem, African-American colleague of mine, I like how he puts the trauma as anything the body perceives as too much, too fast, or too soon. And just take that in. Every one of us here has lived through a big T trauma or a small t trauma. And that could be as passing as being bullied in the 3rd grade on the playground. It could be also as enormous as migrating, or being displaced from one's home. It could be racial epithets. It could be a war that we have lived through or are living through. Anything that the body perceives as too much, too fast, too soon. And that goes right into our nervous system and is stored there. We'll see in just a moment how that happens. Next slide. Intergenerational trauma is also a term that is important to know these days. Intergenerational trauma, I think in Europe, you see the term transgenerational trauma a bit more. In any event, we're talking about a transmission that happens through epigenetics because the unhealed residue of extreme life experiences does get transferred to future generations. Chemi Shalev, who is a Israeli journalist who I like very much, once wrote in one of his articles, "I am a Jew, and there are scenes of the Holocaust that are indelibly etched in my mind, even though I was not alive at the time." So how true that is, how we all know that. We, each of us, have things that are indelibly etched in our beings, in our minds, our nervous systems, even though we weren't alive at the time. And for every one of our ethnicities, whether we're indigenous or we're Irish and immigrated during the potato famine, or we're Ukrainian and we suffered the Russian enforced famine, or it doesn't matter. We all share these indelibly etched images and indelibly etched programs and residues, even though we were not alive at the time. Okay, there's a widespread, you probably know this, this is a human pattern that we want to shield our young. We want to spare our offspring, our children and our grandchildren from the pains that we've gone through. We don't want them to hurt. And so we muffle our own pain, or we lock it in a closet. But secrets have their own power. We all know that. And when parents don't tell, what has happened, or grandparents, that we were, for instance, adopted, or that we were a twin and the other twin died, or that there were sad losses in the family, or that there was violence, God forbid. Our psyches and our bodies record those secrets nevertheless, because at some level, friends, we are all telepathic. We feel things, we know things. And so those secrets don't really work. Next slide. The Israeli traumatologist Dan Bar-On said, untold stories often pass more powerfully from generation to generation than stories that can be recounted. And they have more power. And so, yeah, let's bring the camera back to me and let me tell a story. Well, a small one and then a longer one. A colleague just told me this, so it's on my mind, that a 10-year-old she was working with never left the house without filling his pockets and backpack with snacks, provisions, food. He would freak out if you would make him get in the car or walk down the block without something to eat. And he didn't know, because it was never discussed, that his grandparents had starved in the Russian enforced, one set of his grandparents had starved in the Russian enforced famine in the 1930s. They were Ukrainian. How is that? How is that possible? There's the story of Esti that I write about in Wounds into Wisdom, and some of you know this story. She came to me because her 7-year-old daughter had acute separation anxiety and couldn't be out of sight of her parents. She couldn't let her parents out of her sight. And so she was falling behind seriously, socially, and in school. She couldn't go to school. Her mother, when we started doing a family map, proudly told me of how her family, her maternal side of her family, had ridden out of Tehran in the early 1980s, when the Iranian Revolutionary Guard had clamped down on all religious minorities. They had ridden out of Tehran, locking up their opulent home, and they rode out on donkeys on opium bundles across the border into Pakistan, and then bribing their way to the airplane and to Zurich and then to Miami and then et cetera, et cetera. And as she told me the story with some pride, I said, but wait a minute, what about your father's side of the family? I don't see them recounted here at all. And she says, I don't know anything about my father's side of the family. They must have all died. I said, go home and ask. And that night, I got a late night call from her, and there was crying in the background and quite a scene, a drama going on, I could tell. And she said, I need to come in with my mother tomorrow. And what had happened in her persistent asking, and Esti's persistent asking, she had overturned a family secret, a terrible and shameful family secret, that her parents had left Tehran pregnant with her. Her mother was pregnant with her. Her Esti was in utero, and they had left behind her father's mother, 92-year-old and blind, but completely cogent. And they were just scared that she would trip the alarms and let her caretakers know, and they had to keep secret. And so they never said goodbye. They left Tehran, and she never knew what happened to the pregnant daughter-in-law and to what they had been visiting every day. And she went crazy with separation anxiety. And Essie was aghast and made her family pull out all the pictures and do a memorial and tell stories. And her parents finally, after 35 years, came to grips with their shame and this terrible secret that they had been hiding. And then they realized within 2 or 3 weeks, something miraculous was happening. In the other end of the home, and the other end of the house, was this little 7-year-old girl who was like started demanding to go to school. And what was going on? All these crazy adults, let me out of here. Let me have a play date. Let me go back to school. And she was, for all intents and purposes, healed. It was as if that breaking open of that shame and all that deferred grief that had never been felt had burst open. It was like bursting open a wound that needed cleansing. And this little girl who had been carrying something mysteriously from 3 generations past and thousands of miles away was suddenly healed. So we're talking about broken connections. We're talking about the things in our families that need healing because they are they're waiting for us. The world is waiting for us to heal them. And let's go to the next slide here and take a moment to reflect right now. In your journal, or just thinking about your own ancestral history and what are the family legacies that have come down to you. And that might be not a dramatic story like Estes, but it may be simply that you have anxiety, or you have a pattern of scarcity or fear about money. You may have a sense of always being excluded, or you're afraid of infidelity. What are some of the things that have come down to you that were shaped by your ancestors' history? And let's keep sipping our water. Okay, we'll go on because our time is so short. I'll just do a tiny bit more as you jot down, as you reflect, because I want you to reflect also about this. Every trauma has a residue. We've said that. Unless it is really processed. So somebody who loses their mother or father early on in their life, there's going to be grief. And unless you have total permission, which is very rare, to go to the very ends of your grief, there's going to be a residue. So we have found that both individual and collective trauma both have the same residues. And that residue lands in our nervous system. As we go through these next 4 universal hallmarks, I want you to jot down the ones that you most know from your own family of origin. And let's go to the first one. Just press return and it'll come up. Good. So dissociation is probably the most universal of all the residues of trauma. Dissociation just means psychic numbing. I'm numb. I'm needing to call 911. I'm needing to take care of business and get someone buried. I'm needing to clean up a messy situation, or maybe I'm needing to clean up blood. But I need to compartmentalize my trauma. And that is a life-saving mechanism. It's very important that all of these, you understand that all of these are life-saving mechanisms. And the only problem with dissociation is that I don't take time after I've called 911 to let my own feelings and sensations come to the fore. And then I stay flat, I stay numb, I keep that material locked up in the closet. Let's go to the next one. On the other side is not numbness, but hyperreactivity. Like, why did you look at me like that just now? You must be angry at me, and I'm not going to tolerate that. And, we fly into sort of hair trigger reactivity. So reactivity is one thing, hyperreactivity. So then this is individual as well as collective. And we see that all around the world right now in the newspaper, where there is a kind of hyper arousal, a hyperreactivity, a hypervigilance. You could also call it that I don't have time to sit in with diplomatic measures. I am going to come in with the big guns because you did what you did, or you didn't do what I expected. Now, this can happen again around the dinner table. It can happen on the world stage. Hyperarousal behavior is when our sympathetic nervous system is effusing stress hormones. And those, you've probably heard of them: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. These are responses that come from being chased by the tiger, or being having a bombs fall where we live. And the problem with that hyperarousal allows us, remember I told you this is a life-saving mechanism, but if I don't, when the war is over, or I am back at home in bed and I don't do my work to relax myself and to process what I've been through, my stress hormones will keep pumping, and I will always be in this reactive, why did you look at me like that mode? There's so much more to say, but we'll keep going. Next one. Toxic shame and feelings of isolation. And we know this from children whose parents are arguing or whose parents are divorcing. There is a shame. They feel guilty about maybe they did something wrong, or they came at the wrong time, or it was their fault. And there is this very natural impulse to go into the cave and lick one's wounds when we are feeling when we're feeling traumatized. But again, and that can be a life-saving mechanism, just to hide out. But when we stay in that cave, when we stay in a sense of shame, or that we did something wrong, that this is our fault, that starts to cling to us, and the whole world is seen through that shame-colored glasses. Again, so much more to say here. Well, let's go to the last one, and that is one that the traumatologists all agree upon, that is the most quizzical: the unwitting or unconscious tendency to reenact one's injuries on oneself or on others. This is why abused children end up abusing, even though they know how horrible it feels, but end up oftentimes, not always, but if their injuries have not been processed, can inadvertently become abusers themselves. It's why a soldier who has been blown out of their mind with trauma wants to sign up for another tour of duty. Why trafficked women and children often go back to their Johns. So these are mysterious things. I write about these in Wounds into Wisdom. I welcome you to read more about that. But right now, I want you just to see, what did I grow up with? Was there one or more of these hallmarks that were prevalent in my family? And now we return to answer our riddle. How do we go about changing ourselves from the inside out? How do we change ourselves plastically, neuroplastically? And the key is awareness. Awareness. When we do seminars such as this one, when we study our own genealogies, when we scratch the surface and turn over stones to understand what was in our background, what makes me the way I am as a result of what happened before I arrived on the scene. Awareness is the key. And go to the next slide for Yael Danieli's wonderful statement. She's one of the great traumatologists of the planet. Awareness of our transmitted intergenerational trauma processes will inhibit the transmission of pathology to succeeding generations. Awareness, when we bring these things to our front brain, to our prefrontal cortex, when we get, insight, ahas. And we say, oh my God, Monica says, I just realized I didn't make that sentence up. I'm quoting my grandmother. That anxiety is not even mine. It's bigger than me. When that 10-year-old realizes why he carries food with him wherever he goes. When we start to get those ahas, then things start to click into place. And we are able to inhibit the transmission of these epigenetic pathologies to succeeding generations. Okay, I'm very noticing of time, and I do want to take you into a brief meditation. Let's go to the next slide. I think there's a meditation slide there. Okay, here's one. We can park on this if we like. Each of us comes with the capacity to heal from wreckage, transform our traumas into compassion, and turn our wounds into wisdom. Take a moment right now. If you have a glass of water, please take a sip. Cheers. And I want to take just a couple of moments inside. So would you get comfortable in your seat? Take a breath. You just got a big brain full of material. And sit back with, perhaps you have a question that you came up with earlier. And I want you to locate yourself for just a moment in a beautiful setting, sitting up against a tree or at the ocean or by a creek, someplace, just see yourself someplace beautiful in nature that's very safe. Your breathing is slowing down, you're really relaxed. As you invite the image of a teacher or an ancestor who is dear to you, someone who is loving, well, and wise. It could be, again, a grade school teacher. It could be your grandmother or a sibling or friend, somebody who is no longer on this earth. I'll be quiet for a moment as we just invite a loving, wise, and well ancestor or ally or teacher to come to us. Just one, if possible. Feel this presence. If somebody has come, if nobody comes right away, don't worry, give it more time. But if somebody has come, just feel their presence, loving you. Maybe there's a smile on their face, or maybe there's just a beaming sense of recognition as they take you in. They've responded to your invitation, and you are there to receive their love, their blessing, their light, their friendship, their yes. If you like, you can simply, without words, present the question that you have in your heart today. Just hold it in your heart. Pose the question. And wait to feel or hear or sense the response. What do you hear? What do you know being transmitted to you from this ancestor figure? When you're ready, I want you to press the enter button, so to speak. I want you to press save and jot down any feeling, sensation, answer, words that you have received in your journal or on the back of the envelope nearby. Hold it in your heart and know that you have guidance and blessing from places that are unseen, and an unseen world where there is help and there is wisdom for all of us. And these are our wise and well ancestors, an entire dimension that we can access in our meditations. As you take your next 2 or 3 breaths, I want you to bow or give thanks and allow your ancestor or teacher to recede and come fully back into your extremities, your toes, your hands. Rub your hands together, if you will. Make some heat in your palms. And then bring that warmth somewhere onto your body, on your face, your heart, your chest, your belly. Okay. Gently bring yourself back. I know that we've gone slightly over time, but I would love to hear from you. Maybe we have 1 or 2 questions. Scott, do we have time?
Yeah, for sure. Great. I'll grab one here from the chat from Karen. Is transgenerational trauma similar or the same as past life trauma from reincarnation, or if you believe that, or part of a collective consciousness that is spread among generations and ancestors?
That's a big question. And of course, I believe in the past lives because it's part of my tradition, and Kabbalah is all full of that, as every mystical tradition is. But in this work is evidence-based, and it's because past lives are so rarely proven because it takes so long to prove such a thing, although it's not impossible. This is really a bit more on the side of having evidence-based clinical data that shows how these transmissions come down through generations. And so, yes, while it may actually be a soul level thing and past life patterns, we keep those 2 things separate when we do this work, and we stay a bit more evidence-based. And yes, to all of what the question was, that it is all interrelated, however, absolutely. And we're really on the seam, the nexus point between mysticism and spirituality and neuroscience. It's really just like that, a common boundary. And all of these things are very, very much interrelated. So much more to say. But I do hope that people will look at my book, Wounds into Wisdom, and forget that. Just check me out online, TirzahFirestone.com. You'll see a whole lot more. There are all kinds of teachings and videos and interviews and that sort of thing. There you go. Thank you. Perfect. And I'm sorry that I went over, but I wish everyone such a good day, and I hope that this that this work resounds for you, and may we meet again down the road.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Tirzah. We really do appreciate your time. Thank you to everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you all here today, and we hope to see you all soon on one of our next sessions. So a huge thank you, and go well, everybody.